Dear learners, in the previous module, we have discussed about major environmental concerns and threat to human population. Today, in this module, we will discuss on environmental policies and environmental protection in India. Following are the objectives of the module. First, I would like to introduce you all to the concept of environmental protection. Then we will discuss why it is important. Next, we will discuss in detail various global initiatives taken for environmental conservation in the form of conventions, protocols, and summits. And lastly, we will discuss various constitutional provisions, laws and acts, schemes and agreements formulated in Indian scenario for environmental conservation. Now let us begin with a brief introduction to environmental protection. Environmental protection is a process of protecting the natural environment on the individual, organizational or governmental or non-governmental levels for the betterment of both environment and human beings. With that known, let us discuss the reasons why we need environmental protection. The primary reason for conserving the environment is to protect wildlife and promote diversity, so that the future generations would be able to witness them. Secondly, for humans to survive on the planet, there is an undoubted need to preserve the nature because it is the only tool that could successfully fight against global warming and catastrophic increase in the temperature. Moving on to the next section, dear learners, we are going to discuss some of the most significant global initiatives taken for environmental protection. As rightly quoted by Mahatma Gandhi, Earth provides enough to satisfy every man's need, but not every man's greed, highlights the devastating effects of industrialization, mass urbanization, persistent unemployment, and destruction of environment. This Gandhian thought contributes to the global initiatives that were taken for environmental protection later on. We will begin with conventions. Conventions are defined as meetings usually amongst members of a particular group. First, we will discuss about Ramsar Convention. It is also known as Convention on Wetlands. It consists of 171 contracting parties. It was adopted in the city of Iran, Ramsar, in 1971. It came to force in 1975. A list of important wetlands that are to be conserved is designated by the parties for management. In 1974, Australia declared the first Ramsar site, the Cobourg Peninsula. In 1984, India became a contracting party to the convention and the Chilka Lake and Keoladeo National Park were declared as Ramsar sites. India currently has 75 sites designated as Ramsar sites, being the highest in South Asia. Next, CITES. CITES stands for Convention on International Trade in Endangered Species of Wild Fauna and Flora. It was adopted in 1963 and it came to force in 1975. It is an international agreement between governments with the objective of preservation of the flora and fauna, that is plants and animals, of the planet and to ensure that the international trade in their specimens do not threaten their survival. Next we have Vienna Convention. It is a convention for the protection of ozone layer with 28 signatories. It was adopted in the year 1985 and it came to force in 1988. The mission of this convention was to protect the ozone layer from depletion. Under it, to strengthen the goal of ozone protection, Montreal Protocol was adopted in 1987 to reduce the production and consumption of ozone-depleting substances, and Kigali Agreement was signed in Rwanda with a goal to reduce manufacture and usage of hydrofluorocarbons by 80% to 85% from the baseline until 2045. Next, United Nations Conference on Climate Change. It is a primary multilinear treaty that governs actions to combat climate change. It adopts adaptation and mitigation efforts directing towards the control of greenhouse gases. It was established during the Earth Summit in Rio de Janeiro 1992, about which we will discuss a while later. It has two sister conventions, namely Convention on Biological Diversity (CBD) or the United Nations Convention on Biological Diversity, whose purpose is to conserve biological diversity across the globe. It is the key document regarding the sustainable development. And the second sister convention is the United Nations Convention to Combat Desertification, whose purpose is to address issues on drought and desertification of land. As of 2020, it has 197 signatory parties. These parties meet annually in the Conference of Parties to review the progress of the convention. Here I have listed significant Conference of Parties, which is also known as COP, and their meetings, the place where they were held, along with the important outcomes. COP1, which was held in Berlin 1985, signatories agreed to meet annually to discuss about maintaining control over global warming and check the need to reduce emissions of greenhouse gases. COP3, which was held in Kyoto 1997, discussed about adaptation of Kyoto Protocol. COP13, which was held in Bali 2007. Here, the international agreement to replace Kyoto Protocol and inclusion of all countries and not only the developing ones was discussed about. COP15, which was held in Copenhagen 2009, had the objective of keeping global warming below 2 degrees Celsius. Also, developed countries committed to help developing countries with finances in the long term. COP16, which was held in Cancun 2010, discussed Green Climate Fund for developing countries. COP21, which was held in Paris 2015, discussed about the adaptation of Paris Agreement to keep global warming below 2 degrees Celsius and continued efforts to limit it to 1.5 degrees Celsius. COP23, which was held in Bonn 2017, a platform called Talanoa Dialogue was created, which allows the countries to share their experiences and good practices in order to achieve the Paris Agreement's objectives. The main aim was to promote the participation and dialogue of local and indigenous communities. A gender action pledge was also adopted to ensure the role of women in decision making related to climate change. COP28, which was held in Dubai 2023, here the first global stocktake was included where states assessed the progress made towards the goals set in the Paris Agreement. Now the next convention is Stockholm Convention. It is an international treaty that was adopted in 2001. The main aim was to protect human health and ecosystems from persistent organic pollutants or POPs. Persistent organic pollutants are highly toxic chemicals that persist in the environment and accumulate in living organisms. Stockholm Convention seeks to eliminate or reduce such substances by adopting a few measures. Firstly, it seeks to identify these POPs like DDT, dioxins, furans, etc., followed by formulation of preventive measures like national action plans implementing regulations locally and globally. Participating parties are then required to monitor and report on the presence of POPs and the progresses made to reduce them. The treaty also talks about providing support to developing countries in the form of financial aid, capacity building initiatives, etc. Apart from these conventions that are mentioned before, there are few more important that we must have a glance at. the Bonn Convention, which is a convention on the conservation of migratory species and wild animals that was adopted in Bonn, Germany in 1979 and came to force in 1983, aims to bring the states and the range states together under it to enable protection of migratory species that passes through them. India joined in 1983 with few important migratory species like Amur falcons, bear-headed geese, marine turtles, black-necked cranes, dugongs, humpback whales, etc. The Basel Convention, a convention on the control of transboundary movement of hazardous waste and their disposal, is another important convention. Next, we have the Minamata Convention that is intended to protect health and environment from adverse effects of mercury, and it came to force in 2013. Lastly, we have the Rotterdam Convention, which is based on prior informed consent procedure for certain hazardous chemicals and pesticides in international trade. It came to force in 2004. Dear learners, now we are going to discuss about few important protocols. The first one is Montreal Protocol. It is an agreement related to production, consumption and emission of ozone depleting substances. Ozone is a layer in the Earth's atmosphere that protects us from harmful ultraviolet radiations of the sun. In the absence of ozone, diseases like skin cancers, weakened immune system can affect people. Ozone depleting substances or ODSs are those chemical substances that cause holes to form on the ozone layer, thus causing the harmful UV rays to reach the earth. Examples of these ozone depleting substances include chlorofluorocarbons, hydrochlorofluorocarbons, carbon tetrachlorides, etc. The protocol phases down the use of these substances in stepwise and time-bound manner. It gives developing and developing countries different timetables. They have equal but differentiated responsibilities. Next, we have Kyoto Protocol. It is an international treaty that aims to reduce greenhouse gas emission, focusing on 6 of them: carbon dioxide, methane, nitrous oxide, hydrochlorofluorocarbons, perfluorocarbons, and sulfur hexafluoride. It is based on the principle of common but differentiated responsibilities. It was adopted in Kyoto, Japan in December 1997 and it came to force in 2005. There are 84 signatory countries with 192 countries as parties to the protocol. It is legally binding with 2 commitment periods. In the first period, 2008 to 2019, 36 developed countries aimed to reduce emissions of harmful gases. They were successful, but there was still a rise of 32%. The second period was 2012 to 2020. Before this period, however, in the COP18, which was held at Doha, an amendment was made to reduce the targets of emission. India has successfully ratified the second commitment period and is the 80th country to accept the amendment. Next, we have Nagoya Protocol. Nagoya Protocol was adopted in 2010 in Nagoya, Japan, and was forced in 2014. The objective of the protocol was to equally share benefits from utilization of genetic resources and helping in conservation and sustainable usage of biodiversity. Since genetic resources from animals, plants, microorganisms, etc. are essential for production of enzymes, medicines and modified genes, industrial and chemical productions as well, the protocol allows the researchers to have a framework to access these resources in return for a fair share in benefits arising from the usage. Indigenous and local communities, moreover, are entitled to these benefits. The parties under Nagoya Protocol must stand by 3 obligations: access to genetic resources, benefit sharing, and compliance with the legal provisions mentioned in it. Now, Dear learners, in this section we will learn briefly about two most important summits, namely the Rio Summit or the Earth Summit and the United Nations Millennium Summit. Rio Summit. There are various other names for Rio Summit, including the Earth Summit and United Nations Conference on Environment and Development. It was held in Rio de Janeiro, Brazil in 1992. Agenda 21 was the outcome of the summit. This comprehensive action plan was adopted to outline strategies for addressing various environmental, social, and economic challenges. A set of 27 principles under Rio Declaration on Environment was taken up to ensure sustainable development. Sustainable development refers to the development approach that meets the need of the present without compromising the ability of the future generations to meet their own needs. The CBD Treaty and UNFCCC, which we have discussed earlier, were also the outcomes of this summit. The Rio Summit also recognized the role of non-governmental organizations and civil society groups and their participation in global environmental governance. Later in 2012, at the Rio de Janeiro, the United Nations Conference on Sustainable Development, or Rio +20, the member states developed a set of sustainable development goals that are to be achieved by 2030. Following are the 17 Sustainable Development Goals. Next we have United Nations Millennium Summit. This summit was held in September 2000, where world leaders gathered and adopted the Millennium Declaration, which highlighted 8 goals known as the Millennium Development Goals. The aim of these goals was to address global challenges associated with poverty, education, gender equality, health, and environmental sustainability. The target to achieve them was set to be next 15 years. These goals laid a foundation for the Sustainable Development Goals that we have discussed earlier. Following are the Millennium Development Goals. With that, we have come to the end of various global initiatives that were taken for environmental protection. In the following section, dear learners, we will dive into discussing about steps taken in India as a whole, along with regional efforts to bring about conservation and preservation of flora, fauna, and resources of this rich and diverse country. Following are few constitutional provisions. Directive Principles of State Policy, Part 4, Article 48A. Protection and improvement of environment and safeguarding of forests and wildlife. The state shall endeavor to protect and improve the environment and to safeguard the forest and wildlife of the country. Next, Fundamental Duties, Part 4A, Article 51A. To protect and improve the natural environment, including forests, lakes, rivers, and wildlife, and to have compassion for living creatures. Next, we have some important acts and laws. Number 1, the Wildlife Protection Act, 1972. This act was enacted as a means to safeguard wildlife and biodiversity. The primary mission of the act is to protect the listed species. These species are divided into 6 categories under schedules. First and second schedule lists offences that are prescribed the highest penalties. Third and fourth schedule are also related to protection of species, but the penalties are much lower. Animals under fifth schedule, for example, common crows, fruit bats, rats, and mice are legally considered vermin and may be hunted freely. The specified endemic plants in Schedule 6 are prohibited from cultivation and planting. Next, we have the Water Prevention and Control of Pollution Act, 1974. This act is aimed at preventing and controlling water pollution and maintaining or restoring the wholesomeness of water in the country. The major provision in the act include establishment of the Central Pollution Control Board at the national level and state pollution control boards at the state level, which are empowered to collect and disseminate information, conduct research, promote and encourage studies and investigations, and lay down standards for quality of water in various uses such as drinking, bathing, irrigation, industrial, and other purposes for the prevention and control of water pollution. Moreover, the Act prohibits discharge of pollutants beyond a certain limit to water bodies. Lastly, the Act states penalties for breaching of its provisions, which may include imprisonment or fines or both. Next, we have the Air Prevention and Control of Pollution Act 1981. This act was formulated in response to rising concerns over deteriorating air quality and its adverse impacts on public health and the environment. The main objectives of this act are to provide for prevention, control, and abatement of air pollution, and to provide for the establishment of the boards at the central and state levels to implement the Act. Central Pollution Control Board at the national level and state pollution control boards in respective states were established. These boards are given the power for implementing the provisions of the Act, setting standards for emission control, monitoring air quality, and taking measures to prevent and control air pollution. Release of particulate matter, lead, carbon monoxide, sulfur dioxide, nitrogen oxide, volatile organic compounds, or other toxic substances beyond the predetermined limit is prohibited. They also sets penalties for breaching of its provisions, which may include imprisonment or fines or both, just like the previous act. Now we have the Environment Protection Act 1986. It was enacted by the Indian government under Article 253 to give powers to the central government to take measures to protect and improve the quality of the environment and prevent hazards to human beings, wildlife, and ecosystems. The act was also the result of two important events, the Bhopal gas tragedy and the Stockholm Declaration. The Act allows the government to conduct environmental impact assessments for certain projects, which assess the potential environmental consequence of proposed projects and help in decision making. There are two statutory bodies, Genetic Engineering Appraisal Committee and National Coastal Zone Management Authority, which was later converted to National Ganga Council under the Ministry of Jal Shakti. Under the Act, there are two important initiatives that include the Ozone Depleting Substances Regulation and Control Rules 2000, which sets deadlines for regulating production, trade, import, and export of the product containing ozone depleting substances, and Coastal Regulation Zone Notification 2018, which again has two objectives, that is, to promote sustainable development while taking into account the natural hazards such as increasing sea levels due to global warming, and to conserve and protect biodiversity besides livelihood security to local communities including the fishermen. Now we have the Energy Conservation Act 2001. The objective of this act is to promote energy efficiency and conservation across sectors as well as provide a legal framework for implementing measures regarding energy efficiency and encourage stakeholders to adopt such technologies and practices. The primary provision of this act includes establishment of Bureau of Energy Efficiency. Following are some of its important functions. It sets energy consumption standards for equipment and appliances, orders the labeling of certain appliances with energy efficiency ratings so as to let the customers know about their energy performance, formulation of policies and programs, and aiding in research and development for energy efficient projects. Biological Diversity Act 2002. The main objective of this act is to conserve India's rich and diverse biodiversity and traditional knowledge associated with them. Along with that, this act aims fair and equitable sharing of benefits arising from usage of biological resources. It puts emphasis on checking biopiracy, protecting biological diversity, and local growers through the three-tier structure of central, state, and local communities in the form of National Biodiversity Authority, state biodiversity boards, and biodiversity management committees. Prior informed consent or PIC from these bodies for accessing the biological resources and associated knowledge for research or commercial purposes is mandatory. It was implemented to give effect to CBD and Nagoya Protocol. Scheduled Tribes and Other Traditional Forest Dwellers Recognition of Forest Rights Act 2006. This act recognizes 4 types of rights of forest-dwelling scheduled tribes and other traditional forest dwellers residing in forests for generations. The rights include title or ownership rights over the land farmed by tribal or forest dwellers, usage rights over minor forest produce, grazing areas, pastoralist routes, etc. Relief and development rights in case of rehabilitation due to illegal eviction or forced displacement, and forest management rights that includes right to protect, regenerate or conserve or manage any community forest resource. The National Green Tribunal Act 2010, agreeing with Article 21, the right to a healthy environment for its citizens of the Constitution, agreeing with the Article 21, this act came to force in concurrence with the Rio Summit of 1992. The act aims to provide judicial and administrative remedies for the victims of pollutants and other environmental damage. The mechanism of this act is to dispose of the cases presented to it within 6 months of their appeals. 7 most important acts: Water Prevention and Control of Pollution Cess Act 1974, Air Prevention and Control of Pollution Act 1977, Forest Conservation Act 1980, Environmental Protection Act, Public Liability Insurance Act, and Biological Diversity Act, except the 2 Wildlife Protection Act and Scheduled Tribes and Other Traditional Forest Dwellers Act 2006 has been recognized by National Green Tribunal Act. Now we are going to discuss about various governmental and non-governmental schemes and agreements for environment protection in India. First one is Project Tiger. It was adopted in the year 1973 to improve the decreasing numbers of tigers in India. Nagar Van Udyan Scheme. Its objective is to create 200 city forests in the country and to create awareness about plants and biodiversity. Swachh Bharat Abhiyan. It is a mass movement initiated by Prime Minister of India Mr. Narendra Modi in the year 2014 that aims cleanliness of the environment and creation of a sense of responsibility amongst the citizens to achieve Mahatma Gandhi's aim for clean India is another very important initiative. Paris Agreement. It was adopted in 2015. The aim is to keep global temperature rise well below 2 degrees Celsius above the pre-industrial levels and to pursue efforts to limit the temperature increase even further to 1.5 degrees Celsius. India played a significant role by announcing 5-point set targets that includes the following. India will increase its non-fossil fuel energy capacity to 500 gigawatt by 2030. It will meet 50% of its energy requirements from renewable sources of energy by 2030. The total projected carbon emissions will be reduced by 1 billion tons from now through 2030. The carbon intensity of its economy will be brought down to less than 45%. India will achieve this target of net zero by 2070. Green Skill Development Program. It came in June 2017, which includes conserving and protecting the green of nature alongside creating awareness among the youth to develop skills and gain experience. Tropical Research and Development Center. It is headquartered in Bengaluru and it aims to preserve natural resources for generations to come with no discrimination. Gram Chetna Kendra. It is based in Rajasthan and this NGO prioritizes the problem of water scarcity. Now, moving on to the next section, we will quickly glance through Amrit Briksha Andolan, an initiative by Chief Minister Shri Himanta Biswa Sarma. The aim of this initiative is to foster a greener and more sustainable development in Assam by the means of planting 1 crore seedlings. The Andolan was launched officially on June 8, 2023. There are 4 main objectives of this scheme. That is, planting 1 crore seedlings, direct benefit transfer in form of financial aid to participants, promoting tree economy by encouraging growth of trees and enhancing green coverage. The benefits of this initiative include improved green landscape and healthier environment, free seedlings and financial grant along with community engagement. Dear learners, with that we have come to the end of today's module. I hope you have understood the discussion so far. We discussed about the concept and need for environmental protection along with initiatives taken for protection globally and in the Indian context. The next module would be on population, human capital and development. Thank you so much for your valuable time.